rules. Okay, first housekeeping rule is only keep your mics on when you're prepared to speak. Otherwise, please mute them. Also, if you want to reveal yourself, that's perfectly fine in the meeting. But obviously, if you don't want to, that's fine. But obviously, if you do like to speak, then I would like you, if it doesn't affect your connections, to obviously to reveal yourself. Second thing is obviously the chat facility. Could you only use the chat facility to point out that you want to speak, or use the raise hand facility, which is in the top right hand side of your bar? Can I also remind you this is also being recorded? Can I also remind you that please go through the chair when you want to make a point. Don't interrupt. Okay, please, use the chat facility or raise the hand function when you do want to speak. Okay, then I'll now start the agenda now. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Karen, do we have any?
I don't have any, Chair, but I understand that you mentioned that Councillor Sivignana may be joining us a bit later as she's in a training session. And I haven't heard from Councillor John Thomas.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we're moving on to the next item. Minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of November. Are you happy for me to sign them and agree them?
Yes, I'll move those. I'll move those.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Drake. They're moved and I think they're seconded by Councillor Cox. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we're now on item 3. Any declarations of interest? I've got no indications of that. Thank you. Now we go into the report of the Managing Director, annual delivery plan. I believe Tom is presenting this. Okay. Yeah, over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Good evening, all. I've got the Q2 annual delivery plan performance report for you. At the last time that we saw Q1 at that meeting, I suggested that we would look to try and enhance the way we present this to you. And if it's okay with you, Chair, I was going to share a presentation to just give you an overview before obviously members can ask any questions, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Okay, bear with me a moment. Okay, that should be appearing on your screen now.
Yes, it has.
Excellent. So this is the Q2 report, and as you're aware, we've got a corporate plan now, an annual delivery plan that cuts across all 5 scrutiny committees' remits. So the first slide here shows the overall status for the annual delivery plan from both the perspective of actions and the indicators. And you can see that the picture right the way across the board is that the status of the plan is amber currently. What we've done here is produce different presentations to reflect the different remits of the scrutiny committees. So the next slides are within the remit of your committee, Councillor Wilson. So initially, the presentation shows you some of the achievements that are highlighted in the report, which has been circulated with the agenda. So you can see again that your committee has corporate plan and annual delivery plan actions that cut across all 4 of the wellbeing objectives for the organisation. So there have been improvements in terms of digital technology and how we're providing online services. That's been very much moved forward in terms of coronavirus. There's been a degree of support around the Armed Forces Covenant throughout the quarter. I know that committee received a report recently about sickness absence, which has improved year on year, or year compared with year rather, and the financial savings are on track in terms of delivery this year as well. And there's some data here around customer inquiries being resolved at first point of contact. In terms of the Objective 2 elements within the remit of your committee, there's been a continuation of the work around Vale Heroes through the quarter, and also the digital learning project for most disadvantaged communities has had an emphasis around social isolation and loneliness in response to the pandemic. Looking at the objective around people being supported at home and in their community, work has progressed around dementia-friendly status in libraries. And you'll remember that's a commitment that we've made as part of the Public Services Board wellbeing plan for the year as well. Work has progressed around preparedness for Brexit, and there's been a degree of collaboration around with key stakeholders in terms of our response and recovery from coronavirus. Work has continued as well to promote the Staff Healthy Travel Charter. So there's some statistics here around the take-up of staff cycle scheme, for example, and the development of the Green Infrastructure Strategy, which is aligned with our climate change response, which I brought to committee last month, has continued as well. And the continuation of us all doing our work from home has further supported our efforts in terms of climate change. So there's some of the achievements within the quarter. And then looking specifically at the actions and measures within the remit of Corporate Performance and Resources Committee, that's shown here in terms of the 102 actions associated with your committee and 13 measures, and you can see how they break down between green and amber. Councillor Johnson suggested, I think it was the September meeting, that it would be really useful to have an understanding of the impact the coronavirus has had in terms of performance, and equally where performance has maybe slipped for non-COVID reasons. And they're shown in the two tables at the bottom of that slide. So you can see, for example, that all 4 of the measures which have slipped are because of coronavirus, and the vast majority of the actions that have slipped, again, is because of coronavirus. Underneath the red elements of the table, these are hyperlinks, and these take you into Appendix C of the report that's on your agenda this evening, Chair, and they provide you with the detail of the exceptions in terms of actions and measures which have slipped, so that members are able to see exactly what those are and what the reasons are. And what the team have done in conjunction, in your case with the managing director and myself, and with the other committees with their sort of service director or outcome champion, have looked at areas that need to be particular focus of improvement in the next quarter. So that's what's shown on the screen here. And in terms of working on Objective 1, there's a focus needed to refocus on wellbeing matters, and that's the health and social care service within the contact centre. There's a need to look at how we can develop options around income generation. They haven't progressed as quickly because we've been focusing in on coronavirus. And I also want to do some further work around how we go on to consult and engage, and we'll talk about that with the next agenda item as well. There's clearly been some delay around the apprenticeship scheme, but that's being refocused within Q3 with the Kickstart scheme kicking off. We also haven't been able to do very much in terms of the development of the policy for staff volunteering either. There's reference here to the income generation opportunities within schools of being limited because of the coronavirus restrictions. And also we need to look at where we can focus some further activity in terms of the Move More Eat Well plan, which is the Public Health Wales plan that the PSB is leading on, but how we can do that safely in light of the restrictions in which we're operating. As you'd expect, the potential transfers of assets to clubs and organisations have been on hold, so there's a need to have a look at how we take that forward in due course. And also, I brought the climate change plan to committee for the organisation last month, but what we'll look to do now in the coming months, and a cabinet report will go in January in terms of signing up to the PSB's climate change charter. And then finally, in terms of the presentation summary, we've given you some information about coronavirus recovery in line with the strategy. And there's been some work undertaken here in terms of supporting educational settings and other settings to make sure that they are acting in a COVID secure manner. Significant work has gone in to promoting local businesses and town centres in terms of the Shop Safe, Shop Local campaign. There's a rolling programme of engagement with local communities ongoing that spans across a huge range of stakeholders, including businesses, and the refocusing of the capital programme to look at how we can support economic growth, but also a wider focus of engagement, which links with the BAME communities. We had a very productive Equalities Consultative Forum this afternoon where we were talking about exactly those issues, and also we're leading on the work regionally in terms of how we make sure that seldom heard groups are completely linked into the Test, Trace, Protect service. That's extended as well in terms of how we engage on green infrastructure. Work is underway in terms of our communication strategy to support the new arrangements and revitalise the commitment to reduce, reuse and recycle. And we're looking at bringing forward within the last quarter of the year a draft wellbeing strategy for staff in the organisation. And as we've talked about, we've also implemented the model of remote working now, which is starting to really embed. So that's a very quick summary, Chair, of the performance reports that are in front of you, and obviously I'm happy to take any questions.
Mark, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. Thank you very much, Tom, for that. Open to any members now. Any member? No members indicate. Yeah, Councillor Carroll's indicated. Anyone else? Okay, Councillor Johnson has got to raise his hand up as well. Councillor Carroll first.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick question in relation to consultations. I see that that's marked down as a red on the service plan and an amber on the action delivery plan. The reason I raise this is simply because we obviously had issues with the Llancarvan school consultation where a number of complaints went in about responses not being recorded. I think there was an issue with the software or something. And it's my understanding that there have been, if not necessarily similar issues in terms of the sending consultation responses in, but I certainly know that there are people in the Pendoylan sort of area who weren't informed about the consultation that's ongoing regarding the Junction 34 A48 link. I appreciate that there are difficulties, especially with the loss of the gem. That's somewhere where this would have been publicised quite considerably previously, but it's just a question as to, one, what actions are the council taking to address the issues with the consultation on the Junction 34 link road, and secondly, in the absence of the gem, both for big consultations like that and also the general sort of planning notices that previously were advertised in the gem, what are the council going to be doing to ensure that, sadly, we now don't have this outlet, how we're going to make sure that these things are properly publicised and that nobody misses out?
Okay, do you want to answer that, Tom?
Yeah,
now?
Certainly. Yeah, that's no problem at all. Thank you, Councillor Carroll. In terms of the actions within the remit of this committee relating to consultation, they relate, and the slippage relates to the corporate arrangements, if you like, for the consultation strategy. So they don't necessarily incorporate the specific exercises around schools or Junction 34, but you are absolutely right in terms of the demise of the gem being one of those outlets that previously we would have been able to use to reach a very wide range of people. In terms of planning notices, my knowledge is that you actually have to place those adverts within the printed press, and they have to be within the area of the council. So that's the reason for using outlets such as the Penarth Times and the Barrow District News. We've also very recently, I've asked the press officer to develop a relationship with the Glamorgan Gazette, who are based in Bridgend, but they also do cover aspects of the Western Vale, because that was a particular area where we didn't necessarily have that kind of widespread coverage. In terms of any specific sort of update in terms of the Junction 34 consultation, if it's okay with you, I can speak with my colleagues in Neighbourhood Services and Transport and get an update sent to you.
Yeah, if I could just come back.
Yeah, of course.
Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Tom. I appreciate we're I was trying to get that within the committee's remit, but accept that a lot of it does fall outside. But the one point I would make, if that is a legal obligation, then does that present a problem to the authority, especially since you mentioned the Glamorgan Gazette, the obvious ones of the Barry and District and the Penarth Times? There are lots of areas in the Vale, I think Cowbridge being a good example, I think Wenvo, Peterston itself, they aren't covered by, I don't know whether the Glamorgan Gazette might touch into some of those, but they're not, it's not a well-read publication in those localities. If there is a legal duty on the council, I assume there is a provision within that for the council to act if there is no relevant publication serving those areas.
Yeah, I think you're right to question the extent of the provision, and I must admit my knowledge off the top of my head of that particular aspect of the planning legislation is limited. But I do recall that when we've talked about it, the requirement is that it goes in the printed press somewhere within the county boundaries. So what I can do, Councillor Carroll, rather than me hypothesize over the actual legislation, if it's okay with you, I'll consult with the OM for planning, and I'll get you the specific details in terms of the remit of what we're required to do.
That would be really helpful.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson next.
Thank you, Chair. And turning to the annual delivery plan monitoring report, I notice, Tom, that for obvious reasons, most of the red that we have in here is a result of the ongoing coronavirus. Obviously, this is Q2, so what's that? July, August, September. So we're already at, sort of might have been the best time, of the year with regard to doing things, but it's also a long time ago now. I'm just wondering if you could identify which are the areas where there's actions have slipped for non-COVID related reasons, and just explain briefly what action is being taken to mitigate those problems. I think there's an understanding that there are lots of things that probably just won't happen in the way they're intended this year, but if there's things which have fallen by the wayside for non-COVID reasons, I think there's a special reason for flagging those up. Thanks.
Yeah, and thank you, Councillor Johnson. It's a very good point, actually, in the sense that we don't very easily indicate that as part of the papers that are provided to you, and that's something I'll certainly look for Q3 to identify the actions and measures which are or aren't part of the kind of pandemic impact, if you like. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to need to actually go through the commentary. So I can either do that now while other members are asking questions, or if it's useful, I can go through and I can tabulate for committee those things, and I'll order them by COVID and non-COVID.
I think that might be better to do another meeting, to be honest, because I know we've got a very heavy agenda tonight. I also don't want to put you under too much pressure, Tom, by doing this now. So perhaps maybe we could consider it at a future meeting of corporate resources. I don't know what you think, Tom, or Councillor Johnson.
I was going to say, Chair, is there something that Tom could send us by email rather than?
That might be a good idea, actually.
Simply because we'll be looking at Q3 before long anyway.
If it's acceptable to committee, what I'll do is I'll send you the information ordered by COVID and non-COVID reasons for Q2 tomorrow, and then when we bring Q3, we'll make sure that it's really easily indicated in terms of that appendix for exceptions, how they're classified as COVID and non-COVID.
I think that'd be very helpful, Tom. Anyone else? Okay, well, I've got a few points to consider as well. One of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about is the triage project, which I know is piloting in Penarth. And I just wondered perhaps that you say on here, it's on Appendix C. It says here, the GP pilot has remained paused during Q2 as many resources were diverted to response to the pandemic. But then it further goes on, is that the funding available in 21-22. Now, you say the direction is upward, but I would argue that it's almost like paused in the sense it should be a middle approach, because it's not being stopped, it's being delayed to 21-22. Now, obviously, I understand why, given COVID and whatever, but I do have concerns because I know many of the residents in Penarth do find it very difficult to access the system at the moment, and I know I've spoke to the health board about it, but again, they are largely thinking of the triage project. So perhaps maybe we get an update about that to us, especially Penarth members as well, in particular. I thought that might be useful. And the other point I was going to make is largely on the sort of lines that Councillor Johnson's made, not just about COVID and non-COVID, but if you go further in to the appendices, you know, if you go to Appendix 1 and the Wellbeing Object Service Plan Actions, what might be useful if we have a colour for the relevant scrutiny committee, just it will be easier to access going forward, so you can point out and pick out the relevant scrutiny committees. Alternatively, I don't know what committee thinks about this, that we only consider the service plans if for that relevant scrutiny committee only, so we don't have all the others, but that's up to the committee. I don't mind either way, because the only thing with corporate resources, we're also the overarching committee as well, so you know we do touch upon everything. So I don't know what members think about that. I don't know if anyone has got a view one way or the other about that at all. I'm not hearing anything, but I wonder if you could think about that, Tom, anyway.
Certainly, Chair, and Appendix 1 to the Appendix A report, which, sorry, this is lots of appendices, aren't there? So the main quarterly report, which is Appendix A, provides all members with a summary. Appendix 1 of that report, and then Appendix 2 provides you with service plan actions and then the performance measures associated with the plan, and that does indicate in the far right hand column the relevant scrutiny committees that those actions and measures are within the remit of. So they give you the access to the very low level granular detail that you may be looking for there.
I was just saying about colours, that's all. But okay. I think Councillor Johnson wants to come in on that, possibly, or something else.
It was just to briefly comment that I think this is an evergreen topic of how much information we should be receiving. If there are I think there are some officers who take the approach that they should give us as much as possible, because then we can decide how much we want to consider and what questions we want to ask, because the alternative is that we don't get the information that we want and then we go and ask for it and generate more work anyway. I don't think there's a perfect scenario for that. It's a matter almost of agenda management to make sure that we get appropriate size papers that we can focus upon and be able to laser on the detail that we require. And there's no silver bullet for that one.
No, I quite agree. I think I've been on these meetings for some considerable number of years, and we've always had this discussion about too little or too much. You can't win either way, to be quite honest with you. And certain members are nodding in agreement there. So I quite understand where you're coming from, Councillor Johnson. Okay, has anyone got any further comments at all? Okay. Are we happy? Okay, thank you. We're happy to move that and to move on to the next item on the agenda now. Thank you very much. Now, we're now going to Caris, I believe. Where are you monitoring?
Have we missed an item, Chair?
I think we're still on we're off on the reference item. Apologies. Reference item number 5. Yes. Apologies.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm sorry to muscle in over my my
No, that's
finance
absolutely.
colleague.
Someone was looking at me, and I was thinking, yeah, I've probably gone too fast. Yeah. Apologies.
This is a reference from Cabinet to your committee, Chair, of the draft annual delivery plan for 2021 to 22.
Yeah.
As you as a committee are aware that with the introduction of the new corporate plan in this year, we also committed to delivering an annual delivery plan each year. And that was in response to consultation of both members and the public, saying when you set out 5-year commitments, it would be very useful to understand the specific activity that you're going to deliver in each of the years so that we can A, scrutinise and B, understand what's been delivered. So we've started work in terms of developing the annual delivery plan for next financial year and are bringing it to all scrutiny committees this side of Christmas. The consultation closes on the 4th of January 2021. This year, the annual delivery plan process has been informed by obviously the existing annual delivery plan in terms of commitments that may need to be carried forward or morphed. We've taken into consideration staff feedback from our partners, consultation findings, the new requirements and legislation that we know is coming into force, our coronavirus recovery strategy, the ongoing response to COVID, and also the views of our regulators. And what I've got in the papers for you to consider this evening is the draft of the actions that go into the annual delivery plan for next year. I'm appreciative that it's a really big document for people to discuss and scrutinise at committee. So obviously I'd be happy to take any questions and views this evening, but also if members wanted any further sessions to provide feedback or to write their feedback to us, happy to take that up until the 4th of January. The plan is ambitious for the organisation. It sets out a series of commitments that we're looking to make, and across all of the objectives, I've just got some examples of things that are within the remit of your committee. So within Objective 1, there are commitments around how we involve, engage and consult, the development of further online services, the financial response to coronavirus and how we manage that within the context of our revenue budgets, the development of a new transformational change programme and our response to Brexit. Within Objective 2, it makes reference to the Council's apprenticeship scheme, the work that's underway around city region development, economic regeneration and recovery, and also a focus on the capital programme to support green recovery. In terms of supporting people at home and in their community, there are references to the PSB's plan for Move More Eat Well that we referenced at Q2 in the last agenda item, as well as the Council's ongoing commitment to partnership working in response to coronavirus. And then finally, in terms of Objective 4, there's a commitment to deliver the Climate Emergency Action Plan that we discussed at committee last month, further support for the Strong Communities Grant Fund, and also reference around parking regulations and enforcement. So the reason for just highlighting those is to again demonstrate the integrated nature of these plans now, whereby all committees cut across all 4 wellbeing objectives. As I say, the consultation process is involving all scrutiny committees. Once the consultation closes on the 4th of January, we'll consider the findings of that consultation and make any amendments. And what we're proposing, Chair, is that we'll bring the revised draft of this back to your committee as that overarching performance committee in February. Subject to your views then, as a committee, it'll be reported to the Cabinet in March, and then subject to Cabinet's approval, it will be referred on for for approval by full council in April, and that's because it forms the Part 1 improvement plan under the measure. So the questions we're asking, I suppose, in terms of the consultation is, does this feel like it's got the right actions to focus the organisation for the next year? Is there anything missing from the plan that you would expect to see in it? And do we feel as an organisation that this will deliver our commitments as contained in the corporate plan?
Okay, I think there's some good questions there, Tom. And so I'm open to all members. Any member? Okay, well, if not, I will say something then. Councillor Johnson, go on in.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to let you go first, actually. But thanks so much, Tom, for bringing the annual development plan here. I think obviously that one of the you touched on it. One of the problems with a plan that's got so many points in it is that you're trying to work out what's actually missing, because you can't see what's not there. So you need. I think it does require time to sort of sit there and go through and try and remember what might have been mentioned before. I think where I struggled more contextually with the corporate plan was that there were lots of things in there that you wouldn't disagree with. And the same in some cases, I feel with these objectives they are setting out an action that can be achieved within a 12-month period. In others, the verb is quite vague and non-specific. So the working with and considering and words which can be interpreted in any which way and can't really be scrutinised. On a wider basis, obviously, this is we are in a state of flux that's recognised in the introductions and both to the ATP and in the report. But I do wonder, how much consideration has been given to the following on from the previous report where we've had lots of things which simply couldn't be done because of the circumstances. How much consideration has been given to what may or may not be able to be achieved within an annual delivery plan, and whether there's almost a not a mea culpa, but a section somewhere that considers or sets out, these are things we wanted to do, but maybe we just can't do under these circumstances, because it feels that when you've got 40 or 50, or sorry, probably far more than that, in terms of the number of outcomes or things that are trying to be done here, I'm trying to grasp whether that's appropriately ambitious, overly ambitious, or actually these things can be most of these will roll over and end up on the 22 to 23 plan regardless, because actually there's no end point to considering or working with when there should be a final point that says we can tick something off and say yes, this has been done during this year. Thanks.
Okay, and open to any other member. Yeah, Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from Councillor Johnson's point, actually, Tom, what mechanisms are available to review, update and reassess this plan throughout the year? I mean, I'm usually somebody who likes plans and sticking to them if at all possible, but I think anyone would give the council a large degree of latitude in light of the circumstances we face. So it's really just a question as to whether there would be an opportunity for us to just set it and then take stock and say, hang on, right, we're going to have to move things rather than just move on into 2021, 22. Would there be another way of doing that?
Open to, thank you. Open to any other member. All right, and then myself now. Okay, I'm just going to go with a bit more detail on these various objectives. I mean, I'll take Councillor Johnson's point, and I would enlarge it by looking at objectives being smart objectives, perhaps, and looking at that to see which ones you believe are smart. I mean, you do use words which I think would make it difficult to be what I would call smart, like make effective use of technology. I'm sure we do, and we can achieve that every year. But again, what's the end product out of that? I'm not sure. So let's go through some detail on certain ones. Number 12, for example, provide local youth service for young people, support their well-being, provide a range of programs and activities. Okay, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, don't we do that anyway? So what we're going to do to enhance that, to improve it further, would be my question on that. So again, I wouldn't mind a bit more information on that. I think 17 is a really good idea, a staff volunteer policy, but would it be linked to something like time banking or incentives to get people to do that? So I wouldn't mind something to look at that. The next one here, further on objective 2, a one-stop shop with resident money advice. Shop or shops, would that be plural, singular? Would that be online, offline? I don't know. But again, I wouldn't mind some more information on that would be good. Because again, I think that's really a good thing to do, but I would like to see the outcome. The consultation on the council art strategy would also be good to have a look at as well, going forward. I know there has been one. I know it's been a bit delayed. I was just wondering where we're going on that. The Makerspace project in Penard, that sounds very exciting, but that's the sort of thing that I wouldn't mind to have some sort of idea what that's going to be about, how it's going to work, who is it going to be involved with. I think that's great though. Going forward on the next page, on page 14, objective 4, sustainable fleet, electric and hybrid vehicles. I wouldn't mind some sort of data on that now and going forward, and where it's going to go, how it's going to work in reality. I think that's very good. The pantry scheme, the local pantry scheme, again, sounds really exciting, and I think it's a great idea. But again, I wouldn't mind some more information on that as well. So there's lots of stuff here which is very interesting and very good, but I just think we need to have a bit more information about how they're going to work and operate. Okay, I've stopped now.
Okay. Do you want me to start with Councillor Johnson's questions?
I think so. I think so.
Is that okay? Yeah, absolutely. And I think the question around the state of flux and the difficulty with framing the plan is a well-made one, and we have gone through the draft of the plan as a strategic leadership team, and also when we discussed this with Business Cabinet in the development of the plan in terms of the current environment and the current level of restrictions and what we're forecasting. So there has been that check, if you like. I absolutely take the point in terms of the use of some of the verbs. There are some actions which, by their very nature, are more specific than others, and equally some of them are slightly more discursive and actually do require a slightly looser approach to them. But I take the point, and we will certainly be able to go through and look at tightening up that wording. Councillor Carroll raised the issue of how we monitor and review and amend the plan. As soon as the annual delivery plan is approved, it will then get tracked through each of the 5 scrutiny committees on a quarterly basis. So the item that we just discussed is the mechanism for doing that. We deliberately this year didn't depart from the annual delivery plan. That is the organisation's plan. What I was very keen on doing is explaining to all elected members the reason why we might not have been able to achieve things, whether that's because of the pandemic or for other reasons. So there certainly would be that regular process of review continuing. And Councillor Wilson, you raised the issue of the smart language in terms of framing those actions within the plan. I don't disagree with you, but I think the place for smart actions is probably the service plan. because multiple service plans contribute to these annual delivery plan actions. Some, it may only be one service. In a lot of instances, it's multiple ones, and therefore the language is slightly broader to allow multiple services to contribute up into them. But I do take the point from yourself and Councillor Johnson in terms of looking at how that language is framed so that it's very understandable and it's very clear what we're looking to try and deliver. You asked some specific detail around some of the actions, and I can certainly ask colleagues to provide that to you. But the one example where you questioned around action number 12, for example, in terms of youth services, that's probably a really good example of where we've got actions within this plan that absolutely we provide youth services, but that particular action is looking at focusing on some specific areas and specific areas around vulnerable children and also the Welsh language. And it's a good example, I suppose, of where we see ongoing council activity, but where we know we need to put a nuance on it for a particular year in order to respond to a particular issue. So if it's okay with you, Councillor, there were about 7 or 8 actions that you asked for some additional information on, and I'll certainly liaise with colleagues and get that provided to you.
Thank you. Can I just come back on the last one on getting involved on 17? I was also thinking perhaps MS Forms is a very good package to use, and no cost as well. And I'm just wondering perhaps what we could do is ask members of the council to contribute towards this, and maybe members of the public as well, to add any actions that are compatible with our corporate plan to be put in there using MS Forms. Just very straightforward thing to do.
Absolutely, and you remind me of the climate change consultation which we've launched today with an open letter from the leader of the council, and absolutely the both the survey and the kind of response form are both done through Microsoft Forms, as we're hoping to trial that as a way of doing that. So absolutely, that technology is now actively being used by the council in terms of our consultation.
Okay, so maybe we can take this back to Cabinet with a recommendation to do that as well. Okay, is that okay? Is that okay to members?
Yep.
Yep, fine. Good. Okay, so we're going to, okay, so thank you all for that. And that was really interesting, I thought so. And we're now moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is revenue monitoring. Well, I think it's open to Caris now.
Yes, it is over to me. Thank you very much, Chair. I suppose I ought to start with a bit of an apology to members tonight. You have got a lot of finance reports in front of you tonight, which makes the agenda exciting. I accept that, but you do have quite a lot, and I do apologise. Some of that is because we've split the estimate reports from the half-year monitoring reports. Usually they come as one, but we've split them this year. I'd be interested on your feedback really as to whether or not you think that makes it clearer. So you've got a monitoring report for this year, and then you've got another report looking forward to to next year. So the first one you've got in front of you now is the revenue monitoring report. Now I have tried to follow the example given by my colleague a minute ago around trying to share a presentation with you which actually covers all of them, but I don't know whether members can see that on their screen.
Yes, we can. We can. Yes.
Okay, fine. So what I was going to do was go through and just pull out what I think are the key points for you on these reports, but obviously I'm more than happy to take questions from you when I finish them, really. So as I said, if I start with the monitoring report, so these are the key issues which I just wanted to bring to your attention tonight, really. So the report outlines for you the position on the revenue account between the period of 1st of April to the 30th of September, so the first 6 monthly report, and it does reflect for you as well the financial impact that the pandemic is having on our budget position. So the revenue position is challenging this year. And with the additional pressure of COVID, it's obviously having an impact both operationally and financially on the council this year. Financially, the impact is in two ways, really. Firstly, we're incurring additional expenditure, but secondly, also the council is losing income as a result of the restrictions that we've all faced in the last 9 months. Now, Welsh Government has provided funding for us through the Emergency Hardship Grant to cover the additional expenditure.
Sorry, there's background noise. Please, could you mute, please? Sorry, do you want to carry on, Caris?
Yeah, certainly. So yes, as I was saying, we've got some additional funding being made available to us by Welsh Government. And since in the period that this report refers to, the council had received £6 million of support from Welsh Government in relation to additional expenditure that we'd incurred. Just for you to know, we apply for this money on a monthly basis. At the end of every month, in arrears, we apply for a grant funding by the middle of the following month. And you'll see in the report a table there which shows exactly what we have claimed during that period and what we've had back. With regards to income, we're actually claiming that back on a quarterly basis. So as detailed in the report, we've had just under £1 million received back for lost income during that first quarter. And just by way of an update really for you, because this process is ongoing, so since we've written this report for you, a hardship claim was submitted for 1.1 million for October, and we've had all of that back bar about £5,000. So there's an extra 1.1 million come in for October. And we received £1 million for the lost income that we had for the second quarter as well. And yesterday we submitted our November claim for the hardship fund, which came to 1.5 million. That is slightly higher than maybe some of the previous months because we've included in that monies in relation to homeless services for the rest of this financial year. So this, what I'm trying to get over to you is this is an ongoing process. We're claiming regularly and we're having very few problems with those claims, so the money is coming in. You'll also see in the report that there is other grant monies that have come in and they're detailed in the report for you, which were totaling £43 million. Obviously, a large proportion of that is the grants that have gone out to businesses over this period. And again, that's an ever-changing picture. So since we reported at the end of September, we had a second lot of business grants that went out when we went into local lockdown in Wales in October, November time. And again, you'll be aware we're processing more grant claims now as well. So that is an ongoing process. The budget has been revised as it normally is, and there have been some adjustments to the budget, but they're mainly, well, they're all accounting adjustments really. So the overall effect on the budget has been, and it hasn't changed the bottom line figure. It is difficult to predict an accurate outturn picture for the council this year, particularly because of the issues to do with COVID. And as you know, we've had more information passed to us today with regard to lockdown arrangements, and they obviously will impact on the council, its expenditure and its lost income. So we will keep on top of that, but it does mean it is quite difficult to predict currently what the position will be. However, having said that, in the report, you'll see that we're currently projecting a use of reserves. We'd already planned £1 million to when we agreed the budget for the current year. But on top of that now, there's an estimated additional 3.6 million, which will need to come down from reserves based on the current predictions for spend for this year. The report, as always, really does detail the position for you service by service, so you can see where the particular pressure points are. So in learning and skills, there are pressures around school transport and also around the ALN service. Within social services, there's increased demand around the community care packages for adults, and also we agreed early on in the pandemic, if you remember, to pay a 10% uplift for our frontline staff. That additional cost has not been picked up by Welsh Government, as it was deemed to be a local decision, and therefore that we're picking up the costs of that as well. The same applies for some of the services in environment and housing, where additional money was paid for staff in the waste service and also in the building cleaning service. Again, that was deemed a local decision, therefore we'll pick that up. The council will pick up the cost of that. And whereas money was made available for ICT enhancements, the funding for that actually stopped in June, and therefore there are some costs as well that we've incurred as a council to upgrade our ICT services to enable us to continue to for staff to continue working and for us to have these types of meetings, really. Normally at this time as well, we'd be reporting to you possibly a predicted surplus on our council tax collection. As you'll see in the report, actually, for the period to the end of September, as compared to the same period last year, we've seen a reduction of about 1.1% in our collection rates. The reason, I mean, for that is fairly obvious, but is part due. We do have some residents in the Vale who've deferred some of their payments due to their own personal circumstances, and also that instead of paying between April and February, they've deferred their payments and didn't start until June, until March. So we hope to see some improvement in that as we go through the year, and it has in fact stabilised at that 1.1% at the current time. We do undertake recovery processes in relation to council tax non-collection, but it was halted at the beginning of the year. It was started again over the summer, so we will keep an eye on that particular position. And just finally, Chair, when we agreed the budget for this year, we have an efficiencies figure in there for 247,000. As outlined in the report, we're actually anticipating that these will be met during the current financial year, but obviously we'll continue to monitor that now as we go through. So just that the recommendations for this report are that we're asking you to consider the position with regards to this year's budget, but also to note the amended revenue budget that's set out in Appendix 1.
Okay, thank you very much. Open to any member? Okay, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Caris, for the presentation there. Obviously, this has been a very difficult year and a state of flux, which everyone's found it very difficult. And it's obviously something we've never been through before. That's the nature of a global pandemic that's hopefully once in 100 years, and we won't be seeing too much impact going forward. Fingers crossed, vaccine, etc. Just a couple of quick points I just wanted to try and understand. I think in the past, I can't remember if it was in one of these meetings or in an audit, I asked about the impact of the coronavirus upon services income. So the additional money that we raise through providing services to people, and whether that's changed at all or been restricted by what's been going on recently. The other is that obviously it's great news that so far the additional costs of dealing with the pandemic have largely been met by Welsh Government grants, etc. But I was wondering if there are areas of common concern across Wales at which we have so far started looking at lobbying on a WLGA level to Welsh Government to say, look, actually this is happening across the country. And I'm looking at the council tax collections as an example. If we're down at 1%, I'm presuming that Merthyr is down by 1%, and Torfaen and Blaen y Gwent and everywhere else as well. If there's a case for a common cause, then should that case also be put? And if so, are there areas that you can think of? Because obviously similarly, the services impact on social services or impacts on children's services are probably being felt. That pinch is being felt equally across the country. Thanks, Chair.
Respond, Caris, to that.
Yeah, happy to, Chair. First of all, about services income, I think what might be helpful is that when we submit our claims to Welsh Government, we do actually have to give quite a detailed breakdown with regards to where that income has been lost. What it might be helpful would be if I actually pulled that together and shared it with you so that you can see the service income that we've lost during the year. And that would give you some detail then. I think that would probably answer. Would that answer? Yeah, that's fine. I can certainly do that for you. And that's a good question, really, around the Welsh Government funding. There are certain areas which, as yet, we haven't had any recompense for, if you like, but Welsh Government are monitoring. One is the council tax collection loss. At the 1.1% loss, actually, the Vale is looking more healthy than some other authorities, and it does vary considerably across Wales. And Welsh Government are collecting that data on a monthly basis now to see what the impact has been. As yet, we've got no indication of whether or not they will give us any support, but certainly they're very mindful of council. You know, for us, this equates to a loss of £1 million during the current year. Sorry, that background noise is here. Just let me. My apologies. So they are monitoring that. The other one that they are monitoring very closely is around the council tax relief scheme, because all councils are seeing, understandably in the current climate, more people requesting support in relation to payments for their council tax. And they're monitoring that again very regularly. And in fact, we have had payment for the first and second quarters with regards to loss of income for that. The other areas that they've taken on board comments are around social services funding. And there is now a common formula for all of us to apply with regards to drawing down on social services funding so that we can continue to support the independent sector, particularly because they are dealing with voids. And how do we, if we don't support them in that, there is a chance that sector may not survive. So we're supporting them with voids, and we're also enhancing our payments because they've got recognised additional costs. So those areas are being considered, and Welsh Government is taking as a holistic a view as they can around this, but they also take the view that they can't fund everything. So it's examples like our 10% uplift for frontline staff, their line is that was a local decision and we're not going to recompense authorities for decisions that they make at a local level. Does that answer your question? Okay, fine.
Open to any other member? No. Okay, thank you very much for that. If we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which I think is capital monitoring.
Councillor Willison, Councillor Cox.
Councillor Cox. Couldn't hear you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Cox, you're muted.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. The point is made in the report about some issues remaining to unachieved targets from previous years. I wonder if Carys could expand on that one, whether they're still included within our savings targets or whether some of them have now been agreed we are not going to achieve.
When the budget was agreed for the current financial year, it was acknowledged, particularly in environment and housing, that they had savings that they'd brought forward for a number of years, and they were not going to be able to find them, and therefore, off the top of my head, and I think about £400,000 was put into their base budget this year to acknowledge the fact that they were not going to make those savings. So they will put on a better footing for the current financial year. As we're going through now looking at the estimates for next year, that's another thing that we're taking into account, is that for some services they have savings which with the best will in the world it's going to be very difficult for them to find, and we need to consider that again as we look at setting next year's budget. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, can I now move on to the next item? Okay, excellent. Capital monitoring now. Caris?
Okay, let me see if I can share again.
Okay. That's it. Yep.
You can see that on the screen.
Yep,
Yeah.
we can.
Okay. So this is again is the capital monitoring report for the same period. So that's the first 6 months of this year up until the end of September. And it does take into account the impact of the pandemic on the ability of us to actually be able to deliver the whole of the programme. The programme is challenging this year because of the pandemic. Early in April, I think you'll recall that we made a decision that we weren't going to tender for capital schemes because we had a number of concerns at that stage. One was whether or not contractors would actually be available to undertake the work that we had. Also, whether or not their supply chains were reliable. So would we enter into contracts with them and agree timescales which maybe it would be very difficult for them to meet. We did review this in June, and where we felt these requirements could be met, actually works were tendered, and the positive side of that was that it did enable work to be successfully completed on schools over the summer holiday, which was very positive. There are details in the report about changes that we've made to the programme. A lot of those are due to, we've had a receipt of a number of Welsh Government grants, so we've got some new schemes in the programme. The same applies to the use of Section 106 monies. But you'll also see that we're starting to slip money from this year into next year's capital programme. Much of that slippage at the moment actually is due to the pandemic, and particularly so in the housing service, where understandably it's not been possible for them to go in and undertake work in people's houses over the last 6 months or so. So we are slipping money now into next year's budget. So there is, as usual, there's a detailed appendix there for you to have a look at, which shows the status of all of the schemes. So what we're asking you today is just that you note the progress that we've made on this year's programme, and that you notice the changes and the use of delegated powers, the use of emergency powers, and also the fact that we're changing this year's programme and running some things into the future years. So that was all I wanted to say on the report, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, I got Councillor Gwyn-John. Councillor Gwyn-John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'd like to ask Caris, I did mention it to you earlier, actually, about it's relevant to the slippage at the Lammace flood management scheme. There's 61,000 in this agenda, which has been slipped. Now, I understood the figure on last year, 1920, was we allocated 796,000 to the Lammace scheme. So where's the rest of that money? I looked on the website and it was a little bit blurred, the figures, but I think that's what the figures seem to come up to. Now, I notice on the slippage tonight, on Appendix 1, it actually says 61,000. Because no work has started yet, I understand.
I did pick up your query earlier, actually, Councillor, and I'm still waiting for some information to come back to me.
Could I leave that with you to come back to me?
Pardon?
Could I leave that with you to come back?
Yes, certainly. As soon as I get it, I'll forward it back to you.
Thank
That's
you very
fine.
much. Obviously,
Yep.
you know, thank you.
Okay, open to any other member? Okay, well, I got one I wouldn't mind a bit more information on, and that's on page 9, 2.26, Road Tag Stage 3, Cogan Station, Penarth. I just wonder if you got any information on that scheme at all.
I think what might be better for me to make sure I give you the accurate information is if I come back to you on that. Is that okay, Councillor Wilson?
That's absolutely fine. Brilliant. Thank you. Okay. Has anyone got any other questions at all? Okay. If not, Are we happy to support the recommendations? Is that a yes? Excellent. Okay, we now move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is now we're going through the reports of the Managing Director now on the initial review budget proposals and medium-term financial plan. I think it might be you again, Karis.
I think it might be. I'm sorry, it's a bit of a one-man show.
That's all right. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Okay, so yeah, so this is a slightly different styled report to what you've had in previous years, because this is just looking forward now to next financial year. So what this is doing is presenting to you the initial revenue budget proposals for next year. This year we've included at this stage the medium-term financial plan, and it sets the context for you for the budget setting process and provides a link really between our budget process and our strategic planning to make sure that the two dovetail together. And what it also does is it tries to match future predicted resources and expenditure, identify any shortfalls, and gives really a financial framework for the coming 3 years. Again, we can't get away from the impact of COVID, as I've just said, because it is impacting on us financially. Funding, as I said, has already been received from Welsh Government and continues to do so during the current financial year. But the picture is changing all of the time, and what we don't know is the financial impact that we're going to face in coming financial years. Things like, for instance, as I said, the shortfall in the collection on council tax. That's not going to stop at the end of March, I suspect, with the way that things are going, and the impact of that going forward is quite difficult to predict. Also, there are new services that we're funding as a result of COVID this year, such as homelessness services, and obviously those are funded now up until the end of March. We've had that commitment from Welsh Government. But this has been a service that's been very well received. And again, we don't know whether any funding will be made available to enable us to continue some of that moving forward. So when we, our budget is very much determined by the settlement that we get from Welsh Government, as you know, and our provisional settlement hasn't yet been announced. It's been delayed for obvious reasons, and actually we won't get that now until the 22nd of December, so we won't actually get our settlement until next week. And the knock-on effect to that as well is that the final settlement is now not going to be with us until the 2nd of March, and actually isn't going to be debated in the Senedd until the 9th of March. So that means that a significant amount of the preparation time that we have with regard to the estimates is being done prior to us receiving either our draft settlement or our final settlement. And just by way of reminder that we have to set the council tax for 21-22 by the 11th of March 2021. So as you can see, we're not going to get our settlement, our final settlement, until a week really before we have to set the council tax, and we have to agree a balanced budget by that date. So in order to do that, we've had to make some assumptions at this stage with regards to Welsh Government funding for next year. And therefore, within the medium-term financial plan that you've got tonight, we've actually modelled 3 different scenarios. One is that we get a cash neutral settlement, and by that I mean that we get the same level of funding this year as we did. Sorry, we get the same level of funding next year as we did this year. We've also modelled the impact of the settlement going down by 1% and the settlement going up by 1%. To give you an indication of what that actually means to us financially, 1% change in our Welsh Government funding equates to £1.6 million. So obviously it does have 1% either way has quite a significant difference for us with regards to funding. We've also had to make some assumptions, other assumptions. So we've assumed within the revised budget that you've got there that we make no allowance for price inflation. Now this year, actually, you know, currently inflation is low. but for the last couple of years, we have required services to meet the cost of their own inflation figures, and we've done that again for the figures that you've got in front of you. We have included in those estimates an allowance for a staff pay award, and we have fully funded a staff pay award. But since we put these papers together, there is now discussions ongoing with regards to whether or not the public sector will, or East Local Government will actually have a pay award next year. Now that isn't determined as yet, and therefore the figure remains in those draft estimates. If it's determined that there will be no pay award by the time we have to set our budget, then obviously there is some funding that we've built in there that will no longer be required next year. And just to give you an idea, there's actually 3.7 million in those draft estimates in relation to a pay award. We have assumed that all cost pressures will be funded. As you know, we ask services to identify pressures that they think they have to meet next year, either due to legislative change, due to demographic pressures, or due to pressures that they're currently experiencing in their budgets, and they're totaling over £10 million. And to give you an idea of where they sit, and those details are in the report, there's 2.6 million in there for schools and another 460,000 for education. There's 3.6 million in there for social care. There's £1 million in there for environment and housing, 800,000 for MD and resources, and 1.5 million in there for policy. What we've also done is try to model the impact of different council tax increases for the coming financial year. And I do have to stress that these are just models. These are not decisions by any means. These are just to give you an indication of what would happen if at different council tax levels. So the two that we've modelled in these papers tonight are a 4.9% increase, and that's the same increase as we had in the current financial year, but also an increase that would take the council up to the Welsh average, which is actually an 8.4% increase next year, with a 4.6% increase in the following years in order to maintain that. Now, what I have done here, I hope you can see that, is just the table that summarises financially the impact of those different models. So if you can see from that if we have the same funding next year as we have this year, a council tax rise of 4.9% would give us a shortfall of 11.2 million next year. Or if we took it to the Welsh average, it would give us a shortfall of 8.4 million. And then we've done the same there. I can see what the impact would be of a 1% reduction in our Welsh Government funding, and what the impact of a 1% increase in the settlement. We're very close to getting our final settlement figures. We'll have them by this time next week. I think if there's a question anybody was going to ask, it's do we have an indication of which way it may go? And I have to say we don't have an indication of which way it will go. Differences of opinion, some saying that so much money has come out in order to support us through the pandemic, that will there be much money left in the coffers to give local government any additional money next year, and others saying, but as I've already indicated, there will be cost pressures moving forward into next year undoubtedly, and that they would have hoped that Welsh Government would reflect some of that through the settlement. I don't have an answer for you tonight on that one, to be honest with you. I think we will have to wait until next Tuesday to see what the impact of that is going to be. Just a couple of other things I just wanted to draw your attention to, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
Reserves, we don't, there's no assumption regarding pulling down of our reserves next year to fund the base budget. There isn't an agreement in place, I mean, with regard to next year's budget and the use of reserves. It's obviously something that's going to have to be discussed now as we finalise the estimates. So there's nothing in there with regards to reserves. council tax collection rates, I did refer to that in the previous report, which is that we have seen a reduction this year. And I think some of the reasons for people struggling to pay their council tax this year are not going to disappear at the end of March either. So council has considered the council tax base for next year and agreed that, did that on the 7th of December. And in that report, I did actually propose that we reduce the assumption next year with regards to the amount of council tax that we will be able to collect. In the current year, it's standing at 97.5%. And the report that was agreed by Cabinet earlier this month has taken it down to 97.1% for next year. And I know that at least half of the local authorities in Wales have actually reduced their collection rate assumptions next year because of the experiences that we're having this year. So the next steps with regards to these draft estimates now is that they have actually been to all of the other scrutiny committees during this cycle. There have been meetings between cabinet members and management teams and the budget working group to go through the detail of what's in the cost pressures that you've seen. Our timeline now for finishing, as I said, the settlement will be with us next week. And then our timeline is to bring in the final estimates into Cabinet on the 8th of February. And then they will need to come into council in March for final agreement of the council tax. Now, I don't know whether you want to do it at this stage, Councillor Wilson, but I am aware that we also need to consider what other committees have said in relation to these estimates.
I'm happy to do that now.
Well, the ones I know of, and I'm sure if Karen's still on the meeting, she'll be able to clarify if there are any others. There's been a comment from one committee commenting about whether they should be looked at now because we haven't actually had the draft settlement. I suppose I would remind committee that actually we were in the same position last year, that the settlement actually came in after the estimates started to go through the process, not as late as this year. I think we may have had it actually by the time we got to this committee, but there is one just raising a query about the timing of it. If I was to advise anything to committee, I'd say the problem with not looking at these is that we're in a very, very tight timeline to get these agreed in the new financial year. So we would very much welcome comments that people may have on these draft estimates. And the other one that I'm aware of is that one of the scrutiny committees has asked us to consider the cost pressure that's in there for the domestic abuse assessment and referral scheme. That's coming in from the general housing service. I don't know, to be honest with you, if there are any other comments that have come in from the scrutiny committees. So what we're asking you to do tonight, sorry, I'm flicking between screens. What we're asking you to do tonight is to consider the initial revenue budget proposals and the recommendations from the other scrutiny committees and to forward them to Cabinet for consideration, and also to consider the contents of the medium-term financial plan and provide any comments to Cabinet that you wish to make so that they can consider those as part of the final budget setting process.
Okay. Open to thank you very much for that. Open to any other members? Okay. I haven't got any hands up at the moment. I guess looking round. Okay, if that's the case, well, I've got a couple of points to make then. Oh yeah, Councillor Johnson, you want to come in now?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I think I'll broadly agree with many of the points that Keris has made. I think it's fairly unhelpful that local government is given a final date for setting our budget when it feels that the timetable slips every year because the UK government announces their spending envelope later, which means Welsh government announce their spending envelope later, and then have their own consultation process, which then pushes us right to the edge. Obviously, I'm sure the considerations are already being made from a democratic services perspective that our full council meetings, I think the 1st of March, but we're not going to be getting the final figures from Welsh Government until the 2nd of March, and then that's going to be debated in the Senedd a week later. So it's a process that seems designed to catch local government out rather than be helpful in taking these things forward. The impact of coronavirus this year means that a lot of this is guesswork anyway, I feel. We haven't mentioned Brexit, which is obviously high on the news agenda right now and will be affecting us perhaps in a couple of weeks' time, maybe not, who knows. But when we talk about inflation and impact of of anything, whether it's people's wages, etc., that may well be coming to fruition at that point in time, or may still be something that's just very high on our risk register. Obviously, assumptions have to be made, because you can't go forward without assumptions. So we can't just wait until we've got the figures. These are things that are, I think, very much subject to scrutiny at a later point, once some of these have been firmed up and we have a better idea of where we are, rather than simply modelling a range of possibilities, which at some point will be narrowed down to this is what you've got. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Carys, do you want to respond to that about perhaps an additional corporate resources meeting in terms of the revenue budget? I know we may have one for capital, but maybe revenue going forward, depending upon the changing situation. As Councillor Johnson rightly says, we really don't know about Brexit. That's one issue, and we really don't know about the COVID crisis getting possibly worse in the short term, and the outcome of that as well, and also finances as well of central government going back to Welsh Government. So is there any way we could have another meeting if need be?
Sorry, Chair. I mean,
do you want to come in, Councillor Johnson?
I used to say, I think I mean, it wasn't so much about this committee. It was more the final budget setting process, because we have a meeting that's timetabled for the end of February, start of March, so that we can meet that 11th of March deadline for setting the budget and the council tax. And then Welsh Government don't give us figures until after we've already gone past that point in time. So it's just a consideration of whether we'll be able to set a budget on the 1st of March, or whether we'll have some sort of weird hybrid procedure as we did last year, which I don't think people particularly enjoyed or found helpful, and therefore where that leaves us in general. Sorry, Chair.
I mean, I can answer that. You'll see actually that something's gone into the chat bar here, that we've already had discussions that we can't possibly have a council meeting to set the final budget before we've even had the final settlement. Welsh Government have tried to give assurance that there will be absolutely minimal change between the initial and the final settlement, which is what they did last year. But even so, I think the intention is, as is put in the chat bar, that we will actually move that council date from the beginning of March to the 10th of March.
Okay, thank you. Okay, open to any other member? Is any other member? Okay, fine. I got no other indications at all from any other members. Okay, thank you for that. I think it is what it is, to be honest, isn't it, Carys? And I think we've got to make the best of the situation. And I think you're right to put in sensitivity analysis. Karen, did you want to come in? You raised your hand.
Only to mention, Chair, that we had the recommendations, as Carys referred to, from the Homes and Safe Committee and ER, and I just want to make sure that before we go any further, how you want to deal with those.
I think I'm going to put that to other committee members. Have any committees got any opinions about those at all?
If you want us to share, sorry, Chair, to interfere, but if you want us to share them on the screen, just for members to remind them what they said, Matthew can do that.
Fine. If you want to do that, now, that'd be good.
Matt, if you scroll down to the recommendations.
Yeah, that'd be good. Okay. Yep. Got that.
Next one.
Yep.
You'll see the first one there, Chairman.
Okay. I mean, I think the point we can make about that one is that I think we echo those concerns. I mean, do you want us to write to Welsh Government noting those concerns? I mean, I'm open to the committee now, you know. I'm not getting any indication of the committee are supportive of that one way or the other. Yes, Councillor John.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, this comes up every year with the Welsh Government, you know, and members are really unsure what to do. And last night in the meeting, it was thought by them unanimously by the meeting that we couldn't make decisions as we stand at the moment because everything would change. If we had, for example, if we had the settlement for the 22nd of December, if we had that to work to, at least we'd be working to something. But it's going further and further and back all the time. Of course, this is a difficult year, but it was the same last year. And quite honestly, what we did say last night was that, you know, exactly what it says there. And also we look at the proposals further down on the capital programme regarding resurfacing programme.
Okay. I mean, obviously, I don't want to consider the capital programme yet because we will be considered in a minute.
No.
But I do think I mean, I personally agree with ENER over this. I mean, every year it does seem to get later and later. And I do think we need to echo the concerns of that committee, either to Welsh Government and to the Cabinet as well, because obviously the Cabinet will be concerned because it also means that they got a delayed timetable because of this as well. It affects the whole council, you know, not just the scrutiny committees, because obviously it doesn't give us a great deal of time to scrutinise any decisions that Cabinet make in relation to this, which is rather unfortunate. So I do think we could make a letter write a letter to Welsh Government from scrutiny committees, and I'm quite happy to do that as chair of chairs and vice chairs as well on that sense, you know.
If I may, Chair, I think it's fair to say that there's been quite a lot of feedback from local government generally with regards to the lateness of the settlement coming through. I think there's been an acknowledgement this is a particularly difficult year, for reasons we've already discussed, really. But I certainly know there's been a lot of comment back through WLGA, etc., with regards to the impact that these late decisions regarding the settlement have when we have to set a budget by the 11th of March.
Yeah. Okay. Are you happy for me to move that then? Councillor Carroll wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I just really echo the comments that have been expressed already. From a personal point of view, I would have been a lot more sympathetic if we hadn't experienced what we did last year. I think that they are in uncharted territory this time, but we know that it's something that's happened before, so I would completely endorse writing to them at the very least to highlight these concerns and to make sure that even if it does happen this year as we're going through now, that next year proper provision is put in place.
No, I think that's right. I think we should write to the local government minister, pointing out our concerns regarding this. Okay, fine. So I'm happy to move that. As obviously revenue capital, revenue is what it is, isn't it? There's not much more we can do at this stage. Okay, other than to note it, really. I feel. Okay. Okay, we now move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is capital proposals.
Okay. So we are in the same position in setting the capital budget as we are with the revenue budget. So the report outlines to you the current position with regards to the proposals. We haven't had our allocation yet, and we won't get it until this time next week. And it's the same issue with regards to the final settlement then coming in on the 2nd of March. A few years ago, Welsh Government did undertake to provide additional capital funding to local authorities, but that commitment actually ends in the current financial year. Therefore, because we haven't had our draft settlement either, as far as the figures in front of you today have been based on the fact that we don't think at the moment we've had to plan on the fact we don't have any additional funding to put forward to next year's programme, and we've also had to make some assumptions in there with regards to the money that we'll have for the major repairs allowance, which refers to housing services, and we've had to assume a standstill on that one as well. However, we have continued with our process for putting together the programme, so all services have been asked to put forward bids for next year for capital monies, and you'll see that those are actually attached to the report in front of you tonight. The capital bids received total over £8.5 million for next year, and actually total £20.5 million over the 5-year period of the capital programme. What we're not in a position to do, which we have done in previous years, is to come to you with a proposed capital programme based on the bids that we've received and also the funding that we know we're going to have. We've not been able to do that this year. Therefore, we're not proposing at the current time that there are any new schemes to approve in the capital programme from next year. However, once we know what the settlement is, if there is new monies available, then obviously a draft programme will be put together for approval. But what we do have for you tonight is attached to that report is a list of all the bids that we've received, so that you can see what it is that would be up for consideration, but there isn't a draft programme there for you, including those bids. What we have outlined for you is within there is the school investment programme for the 21st century schools, and what's already agreed going forward in relation to that. The predicted spend on the housing improvement plan is in there, which is £35 million for next year. And the report that you have tonight also does detail how those two would actually be funded. And what assumptions we've made about the use of reserves in actually funding some of those things going forward. So as we have with the revenue budget, these now have been the discussion of meetings with cabinet members and senior officers across the services around their proposals, and we've also referred them to all of the scrutiny committees in this cycle, and I think I'm right in saying the only one that we've had fed back is support for the highway resurfacing bid that's in there. So what we're asking you to do tonight really is not skip a slide, is just to consider what's in front of you, and we'd welcome any comments that you may have about any particular bids. But at the moment there is no draft programme there, I'm sorry, for you to actually consider in total.
That's fine. I mean, we quite understand that, but I'm just open to members. Yes, Councillor Johnson. Thanks,
Chair. Thanks, Caris. I mean, I think we were in the same position last year of having a list of bids, but not a defined programme. You know, same comments apply as to the previous item, that if they don't give us enough time to do this, then obviously we have to you know, make some assumptions, but can't actually put everything in the right place. I think there were two things that are particularly of interest to me, perhaps more conceptually than actual schemes. The first is that the recent full council, I think, illustrated a certain level of confusion around the use of Section 106 monies within the 21st Century Schools programme. I think that one way or another, I think maybe it'd be helpful to have a discussion or a brief, you know, that's perhaps less politically charged than the debate at that meeting, so that we can have a discussion and unpack some, you know, understand what's going on there. I don't know if that's a report to a committee or a training session, just so that councillors can better understand the funding scenarios and how those are developed. The other is that certainly within an in-year basis, there's been a lot of emphasis from Welsh Government on active travel proposals that maybe aren't quite given a single heading or single budget line within the capital programme. So it's so it'd be helpful to understand what funding has come forward from Welsh Government for active travel programmes and what the profile of that is. Obviously, I've raised in a couple of full councils regarding the Barry to Dinas Powys active travel route. I was told, I think, by Councillor King last week that the Welsh Government were interested in Mary Harry to Dinas Powys as much as Barry to Dinas Powys. But I think those are programmes that have been recognised within our proposals previously. So Barry Dinas Powys was in the local transport plan 2015 and was supposed to be completed by 2020. Obviously, work hasn't begun on that, and there's lots of delays. So understanding where there are proposals that have been postponed, I think, would also be helpful, because naturally, when you see a 5-year programme, you assume that things will have been done. But obviously, if something was agreed by us in 2015 and not started by 2020 and just been left unside, then it's helpful to know why those things have not been progressed as quickly as they might have anticipated being. Thank
you. Open to any other member? Okay, can't see. Okay, Councillor John.
Thank you, Chairman. I think, the proposition from the Environment meeting last night was to support the road resurfacing plan. I mean, if we don't get our basics right, it's only going to get worse further down the line, and this affects right the way across the Vale. For example, I went up a street in Barry today, Hale Dewey Sant, and that surface was only resurfaced 2 years ago. It's an appalling condition. And quite honestly, I can't understand why it should be. And I'm not happy about this, quite honestly. And I think there should be an investigation taken into some of this, because that road needs attention badly. And I think, is that in your ward, Councillor Johnson? I think it might be. But nevertheless, I do think, that we need to look after our roads. We're not going to get it all done, but we got to get some of it done. And quite honestly, we need money in the budget. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just respond on that to Gwyn. There are works planned in for the second week of January on Hale Dewey Sant. I understand from conversations with Michael Clobb and others in the Highways Department whether they're concerned as to whether underground springs are impacting upon the state of the road there. As you say, it's been redone and patched up on a semi-regular basis, but degrades very quickly. And I'm interested, as anyone else, as to why that might be. Thank you, Chair.
Pleased to hear that. Good news.
Can I say something? In that area, there is a lot of underground springs. People don't realise that. It's it's a difficult area. And I think when we get these people, if we put in outside contracts and they don't do the work properly, we should bring them back and they need to repair them. Simple as that.
Actually, it might be a commercial income generation. We could have Barry Springwater, couldn't we?
I totally agree, Mr. Chairman, that we need to get on top of these contractors, because quite honestly, it's all about inspecting afterwards.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, and we got the same issues in my ward as well.
Yeah.
I'm totally with you on that, and we know that money for road servicing is precious money. I mean, loads of constituents want money spent on road servicing, but we also want to make sure that road servicing is well done initially, and also thoroughly inspected fairly soon afterwards as well. In terms of Councillor Johnson's point about going back about Section 106, I think it might be quite useful to have a report about that come to this committee, about, what should be 106 used for, and also analysis of where 106 money goes, because I think that's also important as well. Not just education, but elsewhere, where else does it go? And what happens to wards that don't have much Section 106? What about equalising revenue and expenditure throughout the different wards of the will contribute towards the council tax base? As many of my constituents make that point to me,
We can certainly look to bring a report to you with regards to Section 106, how the process and what we're funding and what the proposals are.
And also where we actually collect enough 106 as well, which I think one of the members has put down on the chat. Do we collect enough money from 106? And is there any way we can maximise that a bit more as well?
Going back on the road services, I'm waiting to see the report coming out on the Heads of the Valley when they're doing this project about self-healing road services. There's a bacteria in it and they actually heals. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. It's to do with Oxford University, Cardiff University and one other university. And they're doing this experiment. It sounds very creepy, actually, but
I think Councillor Burnett wants to come in now.
Thank you, Chair. I just thought I'd add in a quick comment. One is in terms of road resurfacing, we've got a new highways manager, and he is doing some fabulous stuff on checking up on road resurfacing and looking at quality and doing things like street licenses and whatever. So that might be something of interest for the committee to look at the progress that's been made just in the past few months. The other thing is that committee would be aware there is an annual Section 106 report that is prepared, and that we are, for people who are members of the planning committee, they would be aware that when there were discussions to do with the with community infrastructure levy, some of the work that was done at that time showed that we are phenomenally successful at raising Section 106 funds. And so I think it might, so rather than duplicate effort on the team, it might be worthwhile in the work programming in a discussion when the next annual report comes, which is normally in about July, I think, sort of June, July time, to actually ask for those questions to be included in that, and the committee would be able to have a complete discussion then around that.
Councillor Johnson, do you want to come back to Councillor Burnett's point?
Yes, thanks so much, and I agree with Councillor Burnett. I mean, I was going to come back in earlier and to make the point that there is already an annual report, as she says, on the Section 106 funding. That report is great. It's very detailed, obviously, and it covers the entire county. I think it's more. It just became clear to me in the full council discussion last week that maybe the purpose and use of Section 106 wasn't as well understood as perhaps it could be, and there's almost not a report for simpletons, but breaking it down into easy to understand concepts that people can see how and why it is used for what, rather than become a rather than it can become a little, or appear a little bit pork barrel when it just becomes, oh, this is what's in this ward, this is what's in that ward. So just I see it as a training and understanding for councillors, so that we're better equipped to discuss how Section 106 monies can and should be best used in the county. Thanks.
Yeah, I take your point, and I also take Councillor Burnett's point as well. And I think sometimes we also have a bit of an input into that construction of that 106 report going forward as well, because I do think that needs to be better understood by members as to how this money is derived from, where does it go, and what leverage is there as well. I do think training is needed, but I do think that's the process we need to look at as well. So I do think we need to perhaps have a report prior to that 106 report being produced, so we can make those series of recommendations and perhaps get that relevant officer here to committee as well, and any other relevant officers to influence the budgeting process for 21-22, because I do think perhaps it's maybe a bit late for now, but I think for 21-22 that's something that we could in fact look at. Okay, all right, happy to move that recommendation. Yeah, fine, excellent. Has anyone got any other points to consider? Okay, about the capital. Obviously, Caris, the capital will come back to this committee, won't it, at a later stage? It did do last year.
It hasn't done, but you're absolutely right, Chair, that last year we were in the same position, that we didn't know what we didn't put you a proposed programme to consider. Therefore, we did actually bring a draft programme just to this scrutiny committee in the January cycle for any comments from yourselves that could then feed in when they went into Cabinet earlier in February. And if committee felt that was helpful last year, and your meeting's probably fairly late in the cycle in January, we could certainly bring a proposed draft capital programme here prior to and any suggestions then being taken forward to Cabinet when they consider the final estimates.
Okay,
would committee find that helpful, I suppose?
Would you find that helpful, committee? Yeah. Okay, we get a few thumbs ups.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, and in the chat as well. I think the last item is housing revenue account now, Caris.
Yep. I'll just put up actually, I think there's one report after that. We're really going for it in finance this year tonight. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. You're right. There's one on the next page. Yep.
Yep. So so what we have here is the housing revenue budget information. This actually is this is looking at this year's revised estimates and then looking forward into next year's budget. So we are reporting to you a revised estimate for the HRA for the current financial year, as we are required to ensure that the HRA is not in a deficit position at the year end. So the first part of this report looks at the details for this current year, and the position has changed. And what we're actually predicting now is an adverse variance of £7 million during the current financial year. Now, before you all fall off your chairs, the reason for that is that we've reduced the provision for bad debts during the current financial year because that's been revised, and the new assessment does actually take into account the impact that COVID is having on that account. There's also been a reduction in the spend on repairs and maintenance budget, and that's another one of these that's been directly impacted by COVID, because obviously people have not wanted work done internally. There's been a reduction in the capital financing costs because we've borrowed less in order to fund the capital programme. Some work that was planned on the digital programme this year is now due to take place next year, so we've reduced the budget for this year. The reason for the big change in the estimate is actually we are now proposing to finance a lot more of our capital expenditure this year via the revenue account. The reason for that is when we closed last year's HRA account, we were left with a large balance on the HRA reserves of 7.9 million, and our business plan for the HRA is predicated on the reserve being a lot lower than that, in fact nearer to just under £1 million. And the reason we had that high balance last year was because the capital spend was lower than we'd anticipated. So the proposal is in this year is actually to use that some monies from that reserve to help us fund the capital spend this year, and therefore the programme, the account would show an actual deficit in the current financial year, which we would then fund from that reserve to take that reserve to a level which is in line with all of the business planning that's been done by the service. So it does show a large deficit this year, but as I said, it'll be funded via the reserve. And then for next year's budget, we're in the same position we were in the same position in housing as we've been on the revenue account for the council as a whole, which is that we get guidance from Welsh Government annually with regards to rent setting for the coming financial year. And when we drafted these estimates that are before you tonight, we hadn't had that guidance. Therefore, we made an assumption about the average rent increase, and we assumed an increase of 2.7%. And so the estimates have actually been drafted on that basis. And on that basis, actually, the estimates would then show a small surplus next year of £25,000. And the details for that are in Appendix 1 of the report that you have tonight. The only thing that I would say is that, as you know, finance is dynamic, and we have now had that guidance in from Welsh Government, and the guidance states that rent increases should be a maximum of CPI plus 1%. They take CPI as at September, where it was actually 0.5%. So the maximum rent increase for next year can be 1.5%. Now, the estimates in front of you tonight are actually predicated on a 2.7% increase. So we are reworking these now and reworking them through the business plan, which also comes back through Cabinet before the next financial year. So there has been a change to those, which we're currently working on, and we'll obviously put in place the revised budget in time to set the budgets now at the beginning of March. So what we're asking you to do is to consider that revised estimate for the revised budget rather for the current financial year, and then any comments that you have in relation to next year's budget, I'd like to have them so that we can feed them forward into Cabinet when they're actually set in the final budgets.
Okay, open to any member? Any member? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Keris. Just to say, I have no problem with the amended budget for 2020-21 and the change with the revenue accounts. I was going to ask, and you sort of answered the question at the end. I was going to ask about whether that was a particularly high increase in the rent that was being proposed. Obviously, if it's 1.5%, then that may well be closer in line with actual inflation by the time we get to that point in time, if we do have a Brexit or a New Year inflationary push.
Okay, open to any other member? Okay, fine, thank you. Oh yeah, Councillor John.
Sorry, Chairman, I just wanted to mention that we're going to be much the same next year with the debt outstanding, because quite honestly, the position we're in at the moment, and the number of people out of work and being able to pay their rents, we could find ourselves in much the same position.
Go on.
I was just going to say, obviously, the service keeps a very close eye on their rent collection, and I'm just having a look at Appendix 1 here. I think they have lowered the they lowered the provision for bad debts in the current year based on their experience of what's coming in during this year, but they've increased it again for next year. So they haven't made any assumptions for next year that people will, that will be in the same position. So they're still making quite a high provision of 1.2 million next year for bad debts, which I think reflects probably what you're saying, Councillor John.
Okay, fine. I think we moved and we note that. We're now on to the final item, which is Treasury Management.
Okay.
The best till last, I would say.
Well, these are the bigger figures, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if I just see if I can load that last bit for you. Okay, so we are required to report to members 3 times a year in relation to Treasury management. One is when we set the policy for the year. We're then required to feed back to you the 6 monthly position, and then we feed back to you the annual report on what happened during that past year. So what you have in front of you now is the 6 monthly report on the Treasury management. Sorry, I've lost my briefing note.
All right.
So yeah, so what you have is sorry, Chair, I'm with you now. So what you have here is the mid-year report for Treasury management for the current financial year. It was considered by Cabinet last week, or rather at the end of November, and after it's been considered by yourselves, it's also required to go to full council. And what it does is it details a whole range of issues, really, as far as Treasury management is concerned. So as you can see on the slide, there are a number of external influences which impact on how we deal with our Treasury management function as the year goes through. And you'll see in the report there's a lot of reference in there as well to COVID-19 because it's impacted on economies right across the world, and that does then impact on our operations as well. Economies across the world have been impacted in the last 9 months. Actually, many of them saw an upturn in their economic activity during the second quarter of this financial year, as there was a slow recovery from COVID. However, that the experience now is that recovery is slowing as we all move into second waves of COVID, and that's impacting again across the world. In the UK, we've had a fall in GDP, and which has been experienced with an increase in unemployment. It's anticipated that the economic recovery will actually be slow from this financial year, and it will take a few years now for economies to recover back to where they were before. The bank rate is low, and the predictions currently are that it's going to remain low now until March 2023. And I think we've already mentioned Brexit earlier on in today's meeting once or twice, and that is having an impact on financial markets as well. So that's the kind of climate within which the Treasury management function has been operating over the last 6 months. So what the report does is it just outlines for you how that's played out for us locally. We've looked at this year's capital programme. And I think, as we mentioned on a previous item, items are slipping from this year into next. And also, so we're anticipating now that we're going to reduce slightly our borrowing requirements in the current year down to 9.5 million. But that may well change dependent on the delivery of the capital programme during the current financial year. We've discussed before at this committee our investment strategy, and really we do try and get the best returns we can on our investments, whilst also taking into account the risk we have when we put our money out with the third parties. At the end of September, the Debt Management Office announced that they were going to offer negative terms on deposits put with them. Now, we have used the DMO quite frequently in the past, particularly when we're placing money overnight. But we were in a position whereby if I put money into the DMO today, when I got it back tomorrow, I'd have less back. So therefore, we had emergency powers agreed at the end of September to increase the level of the financial investments that we could make in UK institutions and banks. So they were increased from 5 million to 10 million pounds. And that's enabled us to actually place more money, but also we've been able to place more money with Lloyds, which is the council's bank, to ensure that, first of all, priority is the money is safe, but secondary that we do earn some returns on that. So we've stopped using the DMO office to place our money at the minute because, as I said, I was getting a negative rate of return on that money. So just to make you aware that we did make an amendment to our investment strategy for that. We also outline that we are continuing to use different forms of investments as well. So we're continuing to use treasury bills and money market funds. They do broaden our opportunity to actually place the money and to try, as I said, to get as best return as we can. When we set the Treasury management strategy this year, we did set a range of indicators, and these have all been met as at the end of September. And all of the activity that we've undertaken has been has complied with our strategy, but also with the SIPFA Code of Practice and all of the relevant legislative provisions that we work to with regards to Treasury management. So, as I said, this is the half-year report we're asking you to consider. And as I said, this will now be forwarded together with any comments that you may make to the Council for approval at the next Council meeting. So that was what I wanted to say on the Treasury Management Report. I'm happy, as usual, to take any queries or comments that you may have.
Councillor Wilson, it must have dropped out.
I was going to say, have we lost the chair here?
We've lost the chair. So, in that respect, Councillor Drake, I would suggest, because you're vice chair, aren't you?
Obviously, I'll take over from Mark now. I don't know what's happened to him. He's just slipped off the planet, I think.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to ask any questions? I can see Councillor Johnson got his hand up. I presume that was for a question, was it?
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's for a question. I was sat around waiting for Mark to call me, and then realised nobody was speaking. Thanks for the presentation, Caris. I think since I started being engaged with our Treasury management programme, the idea of us earning vast amounts of interest through this has never been considered. The memory of IceSave, etc., is still far too still scars many people in local government. But I think the movement of the DMO to go to a negative position is something that I've heard referenced in sort of in the financial press, but not really noticed as being a new normal in the UK. I've seen it in other countries in Europe. How are we adapting to a move where that might become the normal situation? I see there's a reference to being with somebody who promises to pay up some sort of dividend, but I mean, is in terms of going forward, given the continued low rates of the Bank of England, is this likely to be more common across the sectors that we're engaged with? And how do we deal with that if that becomes the case? If security and not taking risks is the main is amongst our main motivating factors, then I presume that we won't therefore be putting money somewhere where it de facto loses value overnight.
No, which is why we took the emergency powers in September, actually, to broaden out and increase the limits that we could place with various organisations. And up till now, actually, Councillor Johnson, that's helped us. We haven't had any problem placing our money, and also we've got some extra security with Lloyds that we didn't have prior to this. We're currently we will be reviewing our strategy for next year now, because it will have to be approved again in March. The advice, and we need to take our learning into account from this, because I don't think any of us working within the Treasury management team had ever experienced going into negative interest rates before. Our advisors are not telling us that that's the way it's going to be long term, and they're happy with the action that we've taken to date. But it is something I think we're going to have to refer to in our strategy and how we're going to deal with it going forward, because we don't think it's going to be the norm. But this hasn't been a normal year, has it really? So we will have to learn from that experience and reflect it in our strategy going forward.
clearly it's a it's a risk that I don't know quite how high up that was on our risk register before, but clearly that's now something that will have to be considered at any point. That our security may be compromised in that sense.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's really experienced anything like this before.
No.
We are between a rock and a hard place, really, aren't we? Yeah. Does anybody else want to ask Caris any questions on this?
Can I say apologies?
Oh, you're back.
I am back. Apologies. And we just had an internet issue in Penarth, so that's why it disconnected in my part of Penarth. So unfortunately, that's why I went now back on. But thank you for taking the chair, Pam.
Well, I didn't do it for very long, thank heavens. Councillor Johnson has asked this question. I asked if anybody else has got anything, but I can't see any hands coming up.
Yeah, I like to echo that. Can I thank you very much, Caris, for all those reports? I mean, we had a good session there, but it's quite frustrating, I think, from a member perspective, because the uncertainty that we live in at the moment, due to external factors, as we all know well to our knowledge. So, can I wish you all, a happy Christmas, and be safe, please, all of you. I know you will be safe as much as you can be safe. And then, can I look forward to seeing everyone in the new year? Okay, we note the report.
Mark, we note the report. And can I thank Caris and all members of staff, because I don't envy your position at the moment at all, I must admit.
Oh, thank you.
Take care.
Take care,
Happy Christmas.
Yeah. Have a good break.
And drink plenty of the falling down water.
Well done, Caris.
And the berries.
Have a nice Christmas.
Berries spring as well.
Christmas all. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.